Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Frankini from Tumblr House, here with the effervescent Charles Coulombe.
I like that. It makes it sound like fizzy water or champagne, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Very
that.
bubbly.
Yeah, I like that. Effervescent. All right.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
So what's new?
Well, a lot of stuff. Lots and lots. Firstly, next week, I want to remind everyone, on June the 24th is the feast of Saint Jean-Baptiste, Saint John the Baptist. It is the patronal day of the French Canadians. It is our answer to St. Patrick's Day. So if you've got any French Canadian blood or connections at all, partay. Having said that, though, the night before is St. John's Eve, Midsummer Night, which in European and Latin American folklore is like Halloween in summer. So you burn those bonfires, you look for that fern seed, you tell those ghost and fairy tales, you frighten off the witches with St. John's herbs.
You look for that fern seed?
Yeah.
Is that what is that?
Now, fern doesn't have seed normally,
Okay.
because it doesn't reproduce like that.
Right.
But on St. John's Eve, for a short period, if you can get to a fern and harvest its seed that only appears on St. John's Eve, you can become invisible.
That's the folk tale? That's what...
If you can get a hold of that fern seed, it has a lot of other interesting properties, but that's the most exciting.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that neat?
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. And of course, you've got to have the bonfires and so forth. Now, for those of you who are strict Wiccans, and I don't think there can be too many of you, bear in mind that the day you want to celebrate is a couple days before Monday. That's June 21st, the summer solstice, when the sun and when light and dark are equal. Is that very eerie?
Yeah, pretty eerie.
Pretty screwy. Well, all right. I don't know how many Wiccans watch this podcast, but if you are watching, now you know. If you aren't watching, well, you're doubtless seeing something that interests you more. But St. John's Eve and the day itself, ladies and gentlemen, celebrate. I mean, summer where we live is hot. It doesn't have a lot to be said for it other than it's dry usually and not humid.
Which is good.
No, I'll say. But having said all that, get what enjoyment you can out of the feasts of the church. So that's my liturgical report. It was Flag Day yesterday. Did you put out your flag?
I don't think so. No.
Did you pledge allegiance?
No.
Did you sing your Grand Old Flag?
I like that song, but no.
Did you sing the Star Spangled Banner?
No.
Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean?
No.
Obviously, I'm one of the few people who hold on to the old one is.
What did you do?
Me? I tweeted.
You tweeted?
I tweeted.
What did you tweet?
I tweeted that it was Flag Day, and I mentioned that, people pledge allegiance to the flag. They sing the Star Spangled Banner to it. Groups like the Elks and the Boy Scouts and the American Legion of the Knights of Columbus will teach you about it, tell you how to take proper care of it. There's a whole etiquette around it. And I said many have died for it. And these days I weep for it.
Okay.
So there you go. That's what I tweeted.
Well done.
I made my observance of Flag Day.
Excellent. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's it.
In other news, the people have voted.
Oh.
And,
This is great. I love it when the people exercise their rights.
a lot of people said, yeah, sure, go ahead and send them. Most people said that. Some people said, yeah, well, we don't care if he goes or stays, as long as we get our off the menu on Mondays, uninterrupted.
I guess that's kind of a good thing, okay?
And then one guy, Glenn Forbes, said no, because you didn't answer his question.
I'm sorry. There's always a problem child in the whole bunch, but forgive me. However, fortunately, that means the vast majority were yeses.
Absolutely.
Now, there's something else in this. Now, this is the exercise of the democratic franchise. And we know from statistics and things like that for every one person who writes into something or votes or does whatever, there are 10 people who feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually magnify the number of people who voted to send me to the Riviera by 10.
Okay.
All right. Here's the fun part. Are you ready?
Ready.
What we'll do is set up a GoFundMe, and everyone who voted to send me there can back up their vote with money.
That's a great idea.
Isn't it? It would be a GoFundMe.
Yeah, because they voted that way, so they should be in favor of giving you money to go to the Riviera. Absolutely.
Just like you were saying about democracy last week. How people are always happy to vote and then carry out what that vote requires.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
That's exactly what you said. And I think this is going to be a beautiful illustration. So what we'll do is we'll have a GoFundMe to send Charles for 2 weeks to the Eden Rock in Cap d'Antibes.
Excellent. I'm excited.
It's going to be great. I'm thinking maybe 10 grand.
10 grand? That's a good goal.
Yeah, because I'm thinking maybe, I don't need to go first class. I mean, it'll be fun. It'll be enough fun when I'm actually at the Eden Rock. I don't need to go first class. We have to gild the lily. So, you send me over there for 2 weeks, and then for 2 weeks I'll explore the French Riviera looking for management techniques.
It's a worthy endeavor.
I think so. The Eden Rock is a wonderful place to gather your thoughts, speak to other people who are interested in that kind of thing, and so forth. So, all right, you heard it here. The GoFundMe is going to be launched, ladies and gentlemen. Time to put your money behind your vote. In a way, it's like it's almost like voting for a oh gosh, what do they call those things? A bond issue.
Oh, okay. Wow. Do we still do that?
Oh God, yes. We vote bond issues and everyone. It's like the great thing about a bond issue is that, and this is where it's like kind of like the GoFundMe, only the GoFundMe is better. In a bond issue, like let's say for instance you got a bond issue to raise money for the library. That sounds great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except the money comes from property owners, homeowners.
Okay.
Now I don't own my home.
Uh-huh.
I don't own any property at all. I'm a poor starving writer whose only hope in life is to be sent to the Eden Rock for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does that mean? It means that if I vote yes in any bond issue, I'm voting to spend somebody else's money, not mine.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always vote no on bond issues.
No.
I vote, but not because, even if it's something I think is great, I vote no, because I don't feel I have the right to appropriate other people's money
Yeah.
when I'm not putting in. But see, ladies and gentlemen, this is better than a bond issue because you'll be able to personally contribute to sending me on that fact-finding mission for 2 weeks.
I agree.
Yeah. So we'll see how much comes through.
Yeah. Okay, let's get started.
All right.
First question is from Todd. Recently, the Holy Father allegedly told the homosexual Chilean survivor of clergy sex abuse that God made him that way, and that God and the Pope love him as he is. Combine these comments with past statements that hell does not exist, and you have a true dagger to the faith. I attend a Novus Ordo parish, and believe me, the God made you that way statement is burning through the parish like wildfire. They love it, evidenced by Facebook, Twitter posts, etc. The Pope won't even clarify his statements. Such a non-denial speaks volumes. By his actions, I think Francis has hammered the final nails in American Catholicism, or at least Orthodox Catholicism. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Bona tempora vivant.
Oh boy. Well, first and foremost, you got to bear a couple of things in mind. One is that most American Catholics don't listen to the Pope anyway when it's something they don't want to hear. Did Humane Vitae go running through the parishes? Did it even go running through the rectories? Did it go running through the chancery offices? No. You see, if you're a bad Catholic, You'll respond to whatever's bad on the part of the hierarchy, either by embracing their incorrect teachings when they go along with what you want, or by using their malfeasances to justify your own. I don't have to go to Mass because Bishop Oblivion is a child molester. See? But that tells us more about the individual than it does about the faith. I mean, we are what we are. We had Benedict XVI from 2005 until 2013. And most of the time, even us trads spent complaining about him.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right, okay, all right. Sure, okay. You get something a little bit more to your own taste. And so we have. And, similarly, when I have a non-Catholic friend say to me, I just love your Pope Francis, I'm sure you hate him, but I just love him. And my response is, oh, really? You love him enough to embrace his religion? You're going to become a Catholic now? You can guess how far those conversations go. I mean, don't get me wrong. What's going on is horrible. I grant you all that. But it would not have the effect on the American Catholic if the American Catholic didn't want it. It's like the Irish Catholic. They want what they want when they want it, and then they get it. Good and hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry if that isn't the answer you want.
One of the things I thought I took out from Puritan's Empire that you showed is that Americans never really listened to the Pope.
No.
Our founding fathers were a little too effective at insulating the American people from foreign influence, including the Vatican.
Including the Vatican. One of many. And we were never great ones for evangelizing, even when the faith... before Vatican II, where were the great drives to bring in people? Where was the desire to send missionaries out to the frontier areas where the Great Awakening was jumping up and down and the various great revivals? There wasn't any. Now, the Great Awakening, of course, is a different story because there we were illegal. But during the great revivals, we weren't interested. And those great apostles that we had, like Father John Thayer and Father Michael Mueller, the hierarchy shut down. Arnold Damon is another good example. So what do you think you're going to get? Lukewarm Catholics wanted and have finally received a lukewarm pope.
I'm going to do a shameless plug for Solange Hertz's book, Star Spangled Heresy, Americanism. And she shows, what is it, the World's Fair? It was like at the turn of the century where we were already doing this ecumenical type thing where all religions are equal, on par. That was at least 60 years before Vatican II.
And of course, in my day, the Vatican Pavilion at the World's Fair in '64 was great. I was there,
Of course.
as a child.
Yeah.
I loved the World's Fair.
How old were you?
I was 4.
Oh, and you remember that?
Yeah. I remember, almost like snapshots.
Yeah.
I remember the Paris Fair, which is still there, which is the globe thing that symbolized the thing. They had for little kids like myself, they had these little cars you could ride around in, which saved you the trouble of walking. And I remember those very well.
Well, what's the story with the World's Fair? Was that a one-time thing, or is this a very rare deal, or?
Well, it used to be that every year, every other year, I forget which, in some major city across the globe, there would be a World's Fair. And this started in the 1890s, I think, with the International Exposition in Paris, where A1 sauce got its first medal.
You like A1 sauce?
I like A1 sauce.
A little too strong for my steak, for my taste, but yeah.
Oh, well, you don't smoke a pipe and kill your business. Anyway, so so the whole thing became a big deal, especially with the rise first of the League of Nations and then the United Nations. The idea of all the nations of the world coming together in one place, like a family. It was great stuff. The 164, though, was kind of an illegal deal because the mayor of New York at the time wanted to hold one in the capital of the world, New York. I mean, New Yorkers always felt that way anyway, but then they had the UN put in and that.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it. So the international organization that governed World's Fairs decided, no, we're not going to do that. So the mayor said, well, we're going to have one anyway. And they did. And everybody came to it. So, but anyway, that was the, and the Vatican Pavilion was in Flushing Meadows, on the very site where Veronica Lukens, the seeress of Bayside, would get her dubious revelations. I like to say Bayside is the only false apparition I believe in.
The only false apparition you believe in.
Yeah, well, see, the reason is that my dad always told me you can believe anything a chorus girl tells you, that they always tell the truth. And before she became a housewife, Mrs. Veronica Lukens was a rockette.
What's a rockette?
A rockette is a member of the company of dancers and singers at the Radio City Music Hall in Rockefeller Center.
Okay.
This will shock you, a lot of my references are still New York-centric.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. Interesting.
So if you can't believe a rockette, who can you believe?
That's true.
See?
Yeah.
Gotcha there, smart guy.
Okay. You know, whenever people talk, just one more question about World's Fair. Whenever people talk about World's Fair, did it only take place in New York, in the United States? Where are there World's Fairs?
Gosh, Knoxville, Tennessee, Osaka, Japan, Chicago, Illinois. The one they had in Chicago, Illinois in 1936, the motto was it 32? Well, whatever it was. No, it was 36, and they had 39, they had the one in New York. But in 36 it was in Chicago, and the theme was a century of progress, because Chicago had been founded all of 100 years before.
Ah.
Disneyland gives you some of the flavor of a World's Fair.
I mean, yeah, so we never had one in L.A.
No. Not yet.
I mean, they're still doing these things?
You know, that's a good question. I think they might be, but they certainly are not the focus of attention that they used to be.
Yeah, my dad included, they thought it was the biggest thing in the world, the World's Fair.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was great stuff.
Okay.
The funny thing is, when I was little, in my tiny head, I sort of conflated, as though they were somehow connected, three logos: the Paris Fair of the World's Fair, the white on light blue of the United Nations globe, and the NASA symbol.
Yes. Yeah, you said this on a previous thing. It's all the symbols of progress. The world was going up.
That's right. The Telestar.
There you go.
We're going to hit the moon, and then Mars, and mankind, and its never-ending move into the future. Oh, Tomorrowland. That's where we were headed.
Yeah.
Instead, we ended up in a moral muck.
Yeah.
That wasn't the way it was supposed to happen.
I know.
I blame somebody.
Okay. Yeah, somebody's responsible.
You bet. As soon as we find him, we're getting him.
Next question is from Henry Smith.
Okay.
My mother is a Mormon, and I pray for her conversion. She has no interest in becoming a Catholic, despite my father and sister being one. I was recently surprised to learn Mormon baptisms are not valid.
That's correct.
If she never converts, can she receive the anointing of the sick? Also, if she never converts, can I baptize her on her deathbed, even if she had no interest in a Catholic baptism? If she is ever in a coma or unresponsive, would such a baptism be valid and moral?
Oof. Well, the easy half is the last rites. No, you can't give her the last rites if she hasn't been baptized. I don't think. With the rest of it, I have to say I'm really kind of out of my depth here, and would appreciate, because this is an important question. I don't want to minimize it in the slightest. I would appreciate any renowned Orthodox priests of ability to reach out and give me some assistance here. But just off the top of my head, it would seem to me that if you know, when a person's in a coma, unresponsive, they are conscious and their brains are working. Off the top of my head, it would just seem to me that if you did baptize her, and she were of the proper disposition, which you would not know because of her being locked in her head, as it were, then it would take. And if she weren't, then it wouldn't. But I don't know. And as I say, I would appreciate somebody with more learning and better versed than I am in precisely this area to give me some guidance. And if as and when it comes, I'll be happy to pass it on.
Okay. Next question from Patrick McCarty. Can you comment on famous and prominent Catholic Indians, Native Americans, such as the late Mississippi Choctaw Chief Philip Martin, and whether or not Roman Catholicism was ever an attractive option for various Indian tribes?
Well, the answer is yes. It was a very attractive option, especially when you study in depth what their past religions were like. The most grotesque, of course, being the Aztec with their heart sacrifices from living victims. Mr. Martin was the Mississippi Choctaw. They were evangelized by French priests, I think of the OMI, in the late 19th century, early 20th. But yeah, there have been a lot of famous Indian Native Americans, Catholic Native Americans. St. Catherine Tekakwitha, of course.
Oh, of course,
is
that's
the patroness.
Yeah.
But under the French and the Spanish, and even in English Maryland, Catholic English Maryland, you had a lot of Catholic converts, as I say, because the faith answered things that the previous religion could not. An interesting example of this was back in the 20s, I guess, or the 30s. An anthropologist sat down with a Lakota tribal elder by the name of Black Elk. And he got out of Black Elk an account of their pre-Christian beliefs, which Black Elk happily shared with him. But this was turned into a book called Black Elk Speaks, wherein Black Elk comes across as this shaman happily talking about the paganism of his people and how wonderful it is. Well, he, by that time, had converted and had become an active catechist.
Wow.
So he was not entirely pleased with Black Elk Speaks, and he issued a sort of an apologia for himself, which incidentally is to be found as an appendix in Puritan's Empire, and that was called Black Elk Speaks Again, in which he talks about why he became a Catholic, why it's true. He also outs himself as a monarchist when he talks about having danced in front of, and I quote, our mother, Queen Victoria.
An Indian monarchist. Wow, that's interesting.
Well, there are a lot of them. I know some. But suffice to say that it was only with the coming of the 60s and 70s, with white academics inventing the Catholicism or Catholic missionaries as oppressor myth.
Oppressor?
Oppressor. In other words, they oppressed the
oppressor.
Indians.
Oh, okay, oppressor. Yeah.
When that myth was concocted by white academics and then dumped on American Indian students who didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And it's coming out of the mouth of a white man. Believe me, every white man who was doing that really did speak with forked tongue. That's an old movie thing. White men speak with forked tongue. It's sometimes really true.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, it was certainly a lot of Indians died for the faith, both at the hands of other Indians and at the hands of the English. So there you go.
Wow. Okay, next question. I have a question about sacramentals and superstition. What's the deal with the scapular that saves you from purgatory? Or if you keep First Fridays for 9 months straight, then you skip purgatory? I understand that the proper teaching is to not use these things in a superstitious way, but they seem by definition to be superstitious. What is a would-be convert to think? As a current Protestant, this is just backwards. I know waspy Catholics that feel the same way. How are we supposed to think about these things?
Well, for starters, they do work a bit like the sacraments in the sense that the sacraments only take place if certain words using certain materials with certain intentions are performed. If anything is left, of those two is left out, you don't have a sacrament.
Right.
So these things are definite. Now, however, and I could be wrong incidentally, so if I am, don't be upset, I'm just going by what I've got here. It would seem to me that in all likelihood, my questioner is not familiar with the revelations of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque about the Sacred Heart, which is where we get the 9 First Fridays. It's not as simple as you just get off of purgatory. I mean, that could be one of the fruits, but it's a lot more complex than you've made it sound. Similarly, with the scapular and the promises of Our Lady to St. Simon Stock. Yes, I know you'll hear people say today, oh, well, we can't verify the historicity. Ladies and gentlemen, if we're lucky, in 600 years you won't be able to verify the historicity of most of the garbage we do. Let's hope. I don't know for sure if there ever was a Supreme Court of the United States. Maybe it never existed. It was just a myth people used to cover up their desire to screw up.
Their desire to screw up?
Well, yeah, because, fallen nature wants to do all sorts of garbage. So maybe the whole Supreme Court thing was just a myth that later people came up with to explain why the Americans were so stupid.
Possibly.
It could be. It's possible. Well, maybe not. So the thing is, with all of these things, they're not simply automatic rituals by themselves. It's like with the Blessed Sacrament. Our Lord will come down on the altar if the right words, the right intention, the right material is used. That's going to happen. And if you present yourself at the altar rail and you open your mouth, you're going to receive it. But you will only get the graces if you're in the right disposition and not in the state of mortal sin. If you're in the wrong disposition and you are in the state of mortal sin, you will, as St. Paul says, eat and drink to your own damnation. That's really our Lord there, but it's not a good thing for you. Similarly, you go to the confessional, you confess sins, and then he pronounces the absolution, and out you go shriven. Except no. Because if you made a bad confession, if you have purposely withheld sins, then the absolution is worthless, and you have in fact sinned again, a sin which itself has to be confessed. So in other words, the next time you go to the confession, you've got to say, I did this, that, and the other, and I made a bad confession because I purposely did not tell about this and such. So, all of these things are, in a certain sense, magical or supernatural because they operate beyond and they're far more than what we're able to produce in this world of ours. Nevertheless, they do require, in order to be effective for us, our conscious participation in the process. So there you go.
Kind of an interesting question. Would Protestants believe that Mormons have a valid baptism? Because that would be interesting, because then Protestants would have a very specific ritual in mind.
Well, they do. Well, see,
so they're kind of particular too. You need to say the right words, and it has to be the right intention, and you have to do it the right way.
Some Protestants are.
Yeah.
But again, when you say Protestant, you can be saying anything.
Right, well, that's true.
I mean, if they're Unitarian, they baptize in rose petals.
Okay. Yeah, your buddies are Unitarians.
Yeah, I love the Unitarians. I do.
I know you do. That's why I say you're buddies.
You know how they cross themselves?
How?
In the name of the Father.
I don't get it. What? I don't get it. What?
Well, how do they cross themselves? They only believe in the Father. They don't believe in the Son, the Holy Ghost. So, in the name of the Father. That's how Unitarians cross themselves.
Wow.
You never heard that?
I've never heard that.
Gosh, all right. Well, now you know.
I don't have a lot of Unitarians in my friend group.
How do Unitarians start their prayers?
How?
To whom it may concern.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, I doubt my questioner is a Unitarian. But,
Yeah.
But, I mean, it ranges all the way from once upon a time this side of Catholic, i.e. Episcopalian, to that.
Yeah.
And every imaginable permutation in between, snake handlers and everything else.
Okay.
And the only thing that distinguishes them as Protestants, the only thing they really have in common, is their opposition, one way or the other, to Catholicism.
This gentleman is probably a stricter Protestant, so he probably, chances are, he probably does believe that the Mormon, it wouldn't be a valid baptism. So,
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just looking for some commonality here.
Oh, I'll give him that. And again, why should there be a difference between our Lord saying, baptize with water and the Holy Ghost, in the name of the Father, the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, which is required. Why should there be a difference between that and the Unitarian minister baptizing with rose petals? Isn't it superstitious to presume that you need the right words and the right substance?
Ah, yeah, good point.
That's what the Unitarian would say. Whereas he would say that the rose petals are a much nicer way of getting across the same point. That we're dedicating this child to the service of whatever is beyond and the community. And signaling her entrance into our little community here at the First Unitarian Church in Innsmouth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, next question is from Anthony Giovacchini.
All right.
I am agonizing over the immigration issue in the United States. I live in California, and I'm very fond of people from Mexico and other parts of Latin America. I understand the need for border security, but it truly bothers me to see families torn by deportation. What is the Catholic position on this issue, and what are your thoughts as well?
Well, first, when you say what is the Catholic position, that could mean almost anything. The view of my Archbishop, of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, of the Mexican bishops.
Papal encyclicals?
Papal encyclicals. I think you'll find that two things emerge from the papal encyclicals anyway. One is that people do have a right to emigrate to have a better life for themselves, but two is that nations have a right to protect themselves.
Okay.
Now, those are seemingly contradictory, but I think what's obvious is what's being called for is prudential judgments.
Right.
In other words, if I were to say, what is the Catholic view of how much you should drink at dinner? Well, there isn't one in that sense. You should be prudent,
I see.
But one person, one drink of wine, and, he's off with Bill Wilson. Another person, drink you all under the table and they still won't notice it. So what's the church teach about that? Well, don't be idiotic. Don't use booze to justify your sins. I mean, there are things like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of how you're going to apply that to this case, in front of you, like this dinner in this case, we'll see. Now, personally, I reject the immigration debate.
You can't do... No, you have to take a side.
No, I don't, because both sides are lying, and I don't believe either of them. They leave out a lot.
Okay, what do they leave out?
Well, I mean, the pro-immigration people, or rather the anti-immigration people, will not talk about, well, neither will the pros, so nobody's going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is that immigration, A, occurs because it's profitable, and B, it's profitable because the native-born population is dying.
Why won't people talk about that?
Because that would imply that contraception and or abortion are putting us in this position, and that we're wrong.
Ah.
And we're good little Americans, So we can't be wrong because we're good. Didn't we have Flag Day yesterday as proof of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. As long as nobody is willing to talk about the demographic implosion in this country, they're lying. So there's no point engaging. That's the first point. Secondly, as far as the wall goes, I think we should buy the wall from Mexico that they built with Guatemala to keep the Central American immigrants out.
I love that point.
Well,
that they did it to Guatemala.
Yeah, they did it to Guatemala, and they treat the Central American refugees like garbage. You can't own anything there.
Wow.
I mean, if President Trump were truly snide, he would say that we're going to adopt Mexico's immigration laws. And if Mexico wants us to loosen up, they do it first. Because, I mean, their laws are far more draconian than ours.
Yeah, I've never even heard one conservative political pundit say that before.
Nobody's going to say it. Nobody's, and of course, as far as the bishops and and all that go regarding immigration, I would feel a lot better about their stand and about paying attention to them in this area if A, they pointed out the demographic problem and that it's a direct result of contraception. And that Pope Paul VI knew what he was doing with Humanae Vitae. But see, they can't say it because 3/4 of their predecessors in '68 refused to go along with it. So they have problems. When you've got an inheritance of garbage from the past, you have to decide, do I admit publicly this is garbage or pretend that it was all right? To pretend that it's all right is the more natural human response. The second problem is that when the Latinos come up here, they tend to become Protestant because we don't evangelize them. Our catechetics stink. The liturgical life we produce for them is infantile. The only consolation is that we treat our native-born Latinos as badly as we do the foreigners.
So why aren't you anti-immigration? Why just for the immigrants' sake? Stay in Mexico. Stay Catholic.
Because somebody's got to do what they're going to do, what they do.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
The cheap labor that the companies want to exploit by paying them dimes where American workers would be paid a lot more, that work still has to be done. And nobody's going to come out and say that.
Well, I thought there were all these factories on the Mexican side of the border that do that cheap labor.
Well, there are, but I'm talking about stuff that good Americans need done, like their lawns mowed and their babies watched.
Okay.
How are you going to pay a Mexican nanny $1 an hour for looking after your kid if she's not illegal and dependent upon you keeping? I mean, and remember, you live in Bel Air. You may very well be nominated by the next Democratic president to serve in their administration. We know this, incidentally, because every time there's a Democratic president, a slew of their nominees get tossed out for using illegal labor. Thought I mentioned that. Yeah, and of course, they care about the illegals a lot, exploiting them. But the Republicans are no better. I mean, the Republican, the plutocrats that back up so much of the party use this labor. And nobody's going to talk about that. Another area nobody wants to talk about is the terrible damage that has been done to Mexican, Central American, and Latin American culture by the immigrants' contact with this moral leper colony we have created up here.
Yeah, you're talking about the telenovelas before the show.
I was. When I was a teenager, the telenovelas were these, in the 70s that is, were these Victorian morality plays, you know. And now they've turned to the same kind of porn that we use on cable. They're horrible. Absolutely horrible. Birth control and abortion and gay marriage and all that is being pushed down there. And don't get me started on the damage done to the family by the number of fathers that come up here to work, leaving families behind. Nobody's going to talk about this. Certainly not the governments of the countries involved, because they're relieving themselves of excess population that otherwise they might have to think about building a decent economy to deal with. See, everybody's a liar.
Yeah.
Everybody's a liar. The Mexicans will complain about, the Mexican government complains about our immigration laws when theirs are so draconian, as I've said. I mean, it's all.
Yeah.
So, I am not torn up about the immigration question because I know the problem is not the immigrants, nor is it the people who oppose them in everyday life. When your birth rate is gone, the foreigner who does reproduce becomes an inherent opponent, and you become horrified by him in a visceral way. How do I know this? Happened to the French Canadians. When the Quiet Revolution occurred, our birth rate, which had been one of the highest in the world, dropped down to one of the lowest. And the Anglo, from being someone who could be assimilated, which is why to this day you'll see French Canadians with weird names like Janson and Rion and MacDonald, which are pronounced in English as Johnson, Ryan, and McDonald.
Ah.
You can't speak a word of English. Because back in the day, when the French Canadians knew how to breed, people forget, it's hard. But back when they still knew how, these people weren't a threat. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was a great deal of friction.
Yeah.
But it was for political, cultural, religious reasons. It wasn't this visceral hatred that comes when you're dealing with the people who you know are going to replace you.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. That is why the American Anglo has become so embittered toward the Latino. But it's on a deep psychological level, and nobody will address it. He himself can't because he's bought into it. He's contracepting. So what's he going to say? I'm part of the problem. Like people are going to face themselves like that. I don't think so. So where does this put us? I'm not going to blame the immigrants. I'm not going to blame Joe Sixpack, who's getting all riled up. I'm not going to blame them. I will blame every element of the leadership, secular and ecclesiastical on all sides, who have created this problem and who refuse to acknowledge the damage they have done. It would not be a problem, A, if Americans reproduced at a decent rate. B, if the church were catechizing her children and, giving them decent liturgy as well would be a real good thing. C, if the left were not after easy votes and the right were not after cheap labor.
Ooh.
D, if the governments of Mexico, Central America, and the rest of Latin America were decent Catholic governments with decent economic policies. But who's going to call for all of that?
I don't know. Beats me.
Yeah, me too. So the specific thing in the question was he doesn't know how to feel about it?
Well, what is the Catholic position and what are your thoughts?
Well, you've got my thoughts. The Catholic position, I think I've told you, stop agonizing. It's out of our hands. We must leave it to our masters, the smart people with the endless mouths. Them. They'll take care of it the way they take care of everything.
Yeah. No, we have to trust them.
Of course.
Okay, next question is from Don from the future Republic of West Florida.
Wow, I don't know what's more frightening. That he's from the Republic of West Florida, which flourished about 1810, or that the other possibility is actually writing from the future.
That's
Because
true.
then he'll know how much we screwed his generation up. we don't want to let him in on that bit of news.
Okay, his question is, what are your thoughts on the Italian city-states of the High Middle Ages, more specifically the maritime republics? Is this a model for a future configuration and governance of the United States? What was their record of obedience to their respective local bishops and the papacy? Do you have any books to suggest for further reading on this subject matter?
Well, for starters, I hesitate to say to someone from the future what our best setup would be like in the future, since he already knows and I don't want to look bad. But I really don't know what the best configuration would be for us. I can tell you that the great Italian city-states had their benefits and they had their deficits. On the one hand, all of them claimed to be subject to the emperor, and many to the pope as well, those in what were later called the papal states. They each had their local oligarchies made up of different factions that would squabble with each other and with the local bishop, who from time to time was the temporal ruler and then wasn't.
Okay.
Usually after some sort of a rebellion. It was a very chaotic time, and it's no wonder that Machiavelli arose in that context. Having said that, they certainly produced an art and a culture that was unsurpassed by a lot of places that were much more genial, more relaxed.
Okay.
In The Third Man, Orson Welles' character, Harry Lime, makes the rather nasty comment that, he talks about Renaissance Italy and how they were all poisoning each other and nobody could be trusted and all that. And they produced Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Switzerland, on the other hand, dear, sweet, moral Switzerland, in all our hundreds of years has given us nothing but the cuckoo clock. that was his justification for his own thievery and nastiness. But there is perhaps a certain truth to it, I don't know what. And it didn't last, of course, because these very unstable units eventually were, you had different core duchies swallow them all up. But they lasted like that for a good 300 years. So, I don't know that I would hold this as a future example for America. We may go that way whether we want to or not. Remember that the city-states of the Middle Ages, not just in Italy but in Germany as well, were the result of the breakdown of central authority. They weren't planned. Nobody sat around and said, let's have a city-state. What happened is that the central authority, whether the Roman Empire or later the Carolingian, the Holy Roman Empire, the central authority broke down, and so in each city, the people who were already responsible for things took over.
Yeah.
So in a lot of places, the bishop did it, and that was the origin of the Pope's temporal sovereignty.
Yeah.
Because there was simply nobody else in Rome. There was no one else they could turn to. The Latin, or the exarch appointed by the Byzantine emperor had less and less power.
Yeah.
And the day finally came when the Roman militia switched their allegiance from the exarch to the Pope. They fell into the papal states, in other words. It really
it wasn't planned out, like, oh, let's do the papal states.
No, none of this stuff was planned out. I mean, it happened under divine providence, and I can honestly say, under the influence of the Holy Ghost. But it's not like they sat around and drew up these blueprints
Yeah.
for how they were going to organize first the Carolingian Empire, then feudal society, and then the nascent modern states. Nobody sat around doing this. The closest to it was God's will in heaven. Everyone else simply did the best they could with what they knew, and the result was the history we have. And in cities, as they grew, you had guilds of merchants and of craftsmen. And these came to have more and more power because they had control over important elements of the economic life of the given city. And so eventually, in a lot of places, they took over. And they would have a mayor elected from among the guilds. And the bishop would very often, his authority would be restricted to the area outside the city and the cathedral.
I see.
So, while the city council, dominated by the guilds, ran the area, and they would have their own town church, separate from the cathedral, a parish church, that the city's liturgical rites would take place in. And if you ask, what do I mean liturgical rites? Well, if the founding of the city, the patron saint of the city, anything like that would be celebrated with a high mass, a Te Deum, and so on. The annual election of magistrates would take place there. This was all, that would take place, in some places it would happen in the cathedral, but in other places, to show that they were independent of the bishop, it would take place in the parish church nearest the town hall. and that was called the town church.
I see. Okay.
Is that weird or what?
It's pretty weird.
Yeah, okay. Weird is good.
Okay.
We've ranged pretty far on this.
Yeah, we have. But that's okay.
All right.
That's a sign of a good episode.
Okay. We'll see if our next broadcast is from the lobby of the Eden Rock.
Okay, so that's it for the questions for today. Now on for today's book.
Oh.
Chivalry, Everyday Life of the Medieval Knight. Forward by Charles Coulombe. Oh, also written by Leon Gautier, of course.
Yes.
The author
is nice, but
the author is also nice, yeah.
But he's dead, so he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about chivalry. The stories in chivalry are taken from epic poetry, handed down from oral tradition. Let's talk about how we should treat things like oral tradition and folktales. Should we discount these things because it's oral tradition and folktales?
No more than we should recount written records because they're written at the behest of the winners.
But isn't it more official, though? I mean, can't we generally trust written tradition more than oral tradition?
Not necessarily. It depends upon whose ox is being gored by the person writing the written record. In other words, let's put it this way. You're Vincenzo the Conqueror.
Yeah.
All we know about the wars of Vincenzo are what are written in the official chronicle written by the monk Hieronymus.
Yeah.
And you're a good guy. You're a hero. You're the most wonderful guy that ever lived. But that may not really be the way it was. And so there's a folk tale here in the town of Arcadia about when Vincenzo the Conqueror set the place aflame. Now somehow that never made it into the chronicle. And the picture of Vincenzo the Conqueror laughing hysterically as the children were thrown on the burning barns. Well, did that actually happen either? Yeah. But the point is, if you're an historian, you want to look at both.
Okay. Well, but still oral tradition, I have a cool story to say. In a marketing class in college, the professor wanted to test the telephone effect.
Oh, yes.
I'll never forget this day. There was a really big class. It was like 100 people or so. And so she told the first student at the one end the message. And the message was, Richard went swimming in a pool of yellow jello. That was, and as class continued, that message was passed on, sort of whispered from one person to the next. At the end of class, it got to the last person, and professor asked, so what message did you hear? And the message devolved into your trunk. Through 100 people. From Richard went swimming in a pool of yellow jello to your trunk.
That sounds good.
Well, I think that spoke to the whole oral thing. I mean, there has to be some reservations.
Well, they do, but it doesn't really cover it as much as you think it does. And the reason is that you're dealing with people who come from a literate society and who are used to not exercising their memories. I mean, those of us, for instance, it used to be that, and this is a recent example, there were certain phone numbers you had in your head. They were absolutely memorized.
Okay,
Maybe 7 or 8.
That's true.
Maybe 20.
It's true.
You don't do that anymore.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's because you are now dependent on the phone. Well, similarly, in a society where the majority of people are literate, the skill of remembering is lost. Educationally, over the past 60 years, we have gotten away from the sort of rote learning we used to have, where people would memorize poems, where people would memorize the times tables. We've escaped all that.
We don't even do memorizing the times tables anymore?
I don't think so. I know I never did. But that was because
that was a point of pride. It's just what 1993 was for me, and it was like, okay, who can memorize the times table first?
That was 25 years ago. Sorry.
Oh man.
Quarter century.
Gosh.
The wheel of time turns.
I mean, but why wouldn't you have to memorize a times table? I
Because
mean,
you've got a calculator. Why would you not have to remember all the numbers you used to remember? Because you've got a phone. A cell phone that does it for you.
wow, I mean, that's almost, to me, that's on par with, like, why don't you need to learn how to spell? Well, you have spell checker.
That's coming. And if you look
That's
at the
terrible.
if you look at the messages you get,
That's true, too.
yes, it is.
That's awful.
Well, it may be, but it illustrates a principle, and that is that skills that are no longer required are lost. And in a pre-literate population, or population where most of the people are not literate, the use of memory becomes very, very important. And so, when you look at the artwork in Europe, for instance, all the great cathedrals and churches and so forth were designed for a primarily illiterate population rather. They could read their churches in ways that we have to take long art classes to do, and we can't often enough anyway. One of them went in there, and the church was a book. You could read it. Similarly, in earlier times, just the remembering of long ballads and long poems was a skill carried on by the wisest people. And one of the most glaring examples of this is the Iliad and the Odyssey, those two poems written by Homer.
Yeah.
I always like to joke that the Iliad and the Odyssey were actually written by a different blind Greek poet named Homer, who lived at the same time.
Okay.
But it wasn't by the one you thought it was a different one.
Why?
Just 'cause.
Okay.
It's like the Gospel of St. Matthew was really written by someone else.
Oh, well.
Someone else named Matthew who lived at the same time.
I didn't know they said that about Matthew. I know they say that about John.
I
argued with a priest about that.
Of course you did.
In high school.
Of course you did. Of course you did.
Okay, anyhow.
Don't get me started. Anyway, so the thing is that for a good 400 or 500 years, the Iliad and the Odyssey was strictly oral. They were not written down. And that they were. Well, what happens? In the 19th century, by the 19th century, people no longer believed that Troy had ever existed. Educated opinion said it was a myth. But Heinrich Schliemann, who was a wealthy amateur, but a lover of the Iliad, used the Iliad to find, as a travel marker, to find Troy. And he found the city precisely where Homer had it located.
Where was it?
By the Hellespont in what's now Turkey.
The Hellespont?
Yeah, Asia Minor.
Turkey. Okay, wow.
So he found it. And so all the... They were wrong. They were excited, they'd written a lot about it, they'd yapped, but they were wrong. Similarly, oral tradition, folk memory, had it that the Emperor Constantine had a palace in the city of Trier, Germany. But by the turn of the century, of the 19th and 20th, intelligent scholarship, for the most part, had discounted this. Then World War II came and Trier was bombed to bits. Oh, and guess what they found when they were digging out?
I wonder.
Ooh. So that doesn't mean that the oral memory of the folk tradition is 100% accurate.
Right.
It doesn't. It does mean, though, that you should never discount it. And you should use it alongside whatever written records you have to try to arrive at the truth of something.
Okay. Okay, so now that we've got that covered, tell us some of these tales, some of these famous knights. Maybe Roland, or maybe your favorite knights?
Yes, Roland.
Yeah.
Well, Roland was a warrior for the land of the midnight sun. Sorry, that's a Warren Zevon song. No. Roland was the nephew of Charlemagne by his sister. He was a very, very brave individual, and he went with his archer. His sword was called Durendal, which is important to remember for reasons that become obvious momentarily. So, Charlemagne went down to fight the Moors in Spain to help the Christians, and they fought them and smacked them around. Then it was time to go back to France, through the Pyrenees. And Roland, his nephew, was going to be the rear guard. Now, whether, as in the Song of Roland, it was the Muslims, or whether some say it was the Basques, when the main body of the army was out of sight, and it was just the rear guard, the enemy attacked them. And Roland refused to blow the horn to summon his uncle back. And they fought, and they fought, and they died. And finally he blew the horn. But it was too late, and they were all killed.
Wow.
And then, but the enemy was so busy, grabbing their booty and so forth, they didn't notice Charlemagne and his army return. And so then they cleaned their clocks.
Wow.
So in a sense, although Roland was defeated, he won.
Wow.
And his absolutely distraught uncle rescued his sword, Durandal, which, so they say, you can see today at the great shrine of St. Mary Magdalene in Vézelay.
Have you ever seen it?
Years ago when I was a little one.
Ah, okay. Wow, that's quite a story.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Song of Roland.
Okay, well, there's not just, good knights portrayed in the book. There are also bad knights, surprisingly. And I think one of the bad knights is named Raoul.
Raoul of Cambrai.
You tell us anything about Raoul?
He was not a nice person. He had no respect for God. He had no respect for anything.
How could he be a knight, then?
Well, because he went bad. Kind of like priests go bad.
I mean, isn't it, so that, I see.
And really he had, with the qualities he exhibited for most of his life, he would have been a highly electable political candidate here in the United States.
Oh yeah, what qualities?
Loved him. He was ruthless. He didn't stand for anything. He was very secular. He believed in birth control.
Did what?
Well, in the sense of killing babies.
Oh yeah.
He was very much in favor of that, roasting them. I mean, he was a little bit more in your face with it than the abortion industry, but the results the same.
Yeah.
Cutting open wombs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He would have been a very popular person today, but much more honest. So maybe his honesty would have kept him off the ballot.
That's true.
So remember that the others have all of Raoul of Cambrai's qualities except his honesty.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about some other parts. One of my favorite parts, because it really goes into detail on how young gentlemen are trained, their interests, what they get into. And one of my favorite areas is when they talk about hawking.
Yeah.
Because I never heard of this before until I read this book, hawking, where I guess you're training falcons to sort of act like a hound on a hunt.
Yes, it's falconry.
Falconry. Well, he called it hawking.
Yeah, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, and so I found that fascinating. That because that takes an incredible amount of intelligence and knowledge that we didn't kind of apply to medieval people. I mean, modern scholars.
Oh no! You can imagine what medieval people would think of modern scholars. They'd think, oh, the little dweeby ones.
Yeah.
They can't even use a falcon to hunt. You take them into a church and they've got to look at their little notebooks to try to figure out what it all means. They're not very smart. No, believe me, we would look like utter moral midgets to those people. I mean, the average modern Western person, in terms of his strength of character, in terms of his ability to withstand pain,
Yeah.
Our medieval ancestors would laugh us to scorn. And yet we sit in judgment on them like so many Supreme Court judges ordering the murdering of children.
Yeah.
I mean, they would think, ladies and gentlemen, that we were utter scum. Look at what we tolerate. Look at what we're... I mean, the mind reels. Oh, they were so awful and savage. Yeah, because they didn't have drones to murder people in large numbers without ever having to see it. See, that's the difference between us and them. They had public hangings. They had public executions. They were brutal. they were honest. We like to pretty it all up.
Yeah.
Make it all nice. Well, it's not only is it no better than what they did, it's worse because we pretty it up. We, ladies and gentlemen, are the barbarians, not them. We murder infants in the womb, not them. Unless you're Raoul Cambrai, who thought it was fun, but he did it himself with a sword. Mickey Mouse versus King Arthur. I'll show you. We're much more civilized than you were, you awful rude thing, you.
You talking smack about Mickey Mouse? That's uncalled for.
Well, I like Mickey Mouse, and I think, frankly, to be honest, he's probably morally and intellectually, tons above our current leadership. But I digress. I mean, they had all sorts of skills of that nature that we don't have, because we don't need them.
Yeah.
We're fed, like infants by the regime. The difference between getting all your food from a supermarket and being spoon-fed as an infant is not that great.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong, there are things like the slow food movement and stuff like that, even Julia Child. I'm all for that kind of thing, and anything that makes us a little more real. And by the way, I'm not saying that I'm any better than the rest of us. Yeah. I'm a product of this time too.
Yes.
You throw me out into the Middle Ages and I'd be frightened off my gourd.
Well, right. That's why last episode we asked you when you'd like to live, and you said now.
Now, absolutely, because I know this time.
Yeah.
I can navigate this. You dump me in the Middle Ages, what am I going to do? Sit down on my computer and write an angry tweet about something? I'll tell you what, my head would be cleaved by a sword quicker than I can say stop. No, don't make any mistake there. But having said all of that, I also, the phrase though, we tend to look at them as though they were stupid. That's what got me off on this tear.
Oh yeah.
And it's well, see, that is why the parts I like about the book in particular deal with the religion of the night, the Ten Commandments of chivalry. In other words, the stuff that we can actually apply today.
Yeah, let's talk about those. Talk about those. Your favorite parts.
Well, as I say, when he goes into detail about the religion of the night, how he prayed, how very strong and forward his faith was, very open and honest. What's interesting to me about Gautier, of course, he was writing about at the same time, is how much his language reminds me of Dom Guéranger.
Interesting.
Very. Here it is.
Yeah.
Not this.
Well, you told me that the French write like that in general.
Well, they do actually.
Yeah.
They tend to be pretty in your face.
Yeah.
French does not lend itself well to mealy-mouthedness. It's an interesting thing. I mean, even when you get the worst stuff, it's up there. There's no concealing it. I mean,
I think the way you expressed is one of the goals of French writing as compared to American writing. I think you said was clarity.
Yeah.
Clearness of thought.
Right. They value that.
Yeah. And
whereas we prefer mellifluous language. So we're not really so much interested, by we I mean Anglophones, English speakers, we're not really interested in clarity of thought or precision of thought as we are in beauty of expression.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why, for instance, the great fantasists are all English language people. Tolkien, Lewis, Williams. Honestly, the French, the Germans, the Italians have nobody to compare with that. Now, mind you, in other genres they do.
Yeah.
And fantasy is popular now in those languages.
Interesting.
But that's why, like Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe were very popular in France long before they were popular in the United States. Because while they did have beauty of language, they also brought to it a certain precision of thought.
I see.
And that's why, well, I mean, Tolkien is very popular in France now. But, as I say, it's not something that's native to the writing of French. The French vocabulary is a lot smaller than the English.
Okay.
Which is why, I mean, if you really want to get your ideas out clearly, write them in French. But if you want to pretty them up and make them palatable, write them in English.
Okay. So, buy Chivalry, $25 in the Tumble House bookstore by Leon Gautier. There you go. That'll do it for this episode.
Don't forget the GoFundMe. If you all do it quickly, we might be broadcasting this time next week from the lobby of the Eden Rock in Cap d'Antibes.
We can only hope.
We can only hope. Remember, you sending us there on your dime is a triumph for democracy.